Mr. Speaker, taken together, my reform proposals complement the wider programme of reform which I will be bringing forward to move towards a straightforward justice system, one which is more responsive to public needs, which allows people to resolve their issues out of court using simpler, more informal remedies where they are appropriate, and which encourages more efficient resolution of contested cases where necessary. I commend this statement to the House.
Order. I have been hanging on almost every word of the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman for at least the last 13 years, if not for some time before that. Today his statement was a little in excess of the usual required time, and I shall allow for that, of course, in the response of the Shadow Secretary of State, Mr Sadiq Khan.
Mr Speaker, I am grateful to the Lord Chancellor for giving me advance sight of his statement, and I note his apology at the beginning of his statement. One has to admire the mind-reading abilities of senior journalists at the Sunday Telegraph and their Times. It is a huge discourtesy to this House, but it does give one the advantage of having 24 hours advance notice of a statement to be made in the floor of the House, and I'm grateful to both Patrick Hennessy and Sam Coates for their ability to do just that. Mr Speaker, the Green Papers on cutting legal aid and reducing civil costs are among the most important published by the government to date. Legal aid is one of the pillars of the welfare state set up by the Labour government after the Second World War. It plays a crucial role in tackling social exclusion, especially in hard times like these. It ensures that everyone is able to obtain access to justice regardless of their means. Under successive governments, the legal aid budget has grown to the point where it now stands at over £2 billion. That is not sustainable, especially in the current economic context. Mr Speaker, I have 6 questions for the Lord Chancellor. The previous Labour government had moved to cap the legal aid budget and to reduce it. We also plan to turn the Legal Services Commission into an executive agency. Does the government have any plans to introduce legislation to achieve that aim? In recent years, Mr Speaker, we brought the principle of fixed fees into civil and family legal aid cases, introduced means testing into the magistrates and Crown Courts, and on the very day that the general election was called, signed off on cuts to advocate fees in the higher courts. We took these decisions because we recognised the need to reduce the legal aid budget. It's worth reminding the House that many of our actions were taken in the teeth of opposition, both from the legal profession and from members opposite. I'm looking forward to hearing their contributions during the course of this debate. But let me be clear, Mr Speaker, that had we been in government today, we too would have been announcing savings to the legal aid budget. That is a reality we all have to acknowledge. The crucial questions are where to make those savings and how to spend the money that is left available. Can I ask the Lord Chancellor what equality impact assessment he has undertaken on these proposals? Our policy was and is to control the legal aid budget and get value for money for the taxpayer while optimising services for people who need support the most. That's why we concentrated much of our investment on social welfare legal aid. Legal aid delivered has the power to change lives and save money. The Housing Possession Court Duty Scheme, for example, saved thousands of people from possession. It delivered a social and a financial good. Can I ask the Lord Chancellor, is the government committed to preserving that and similar schemes? And can I also ask him, what balance does it intend to strike between civil and criminal cases? Can he explain why he is proposing for more severe cuts in civil and family legal aid and less so in criminal legal aid? And can he answer whether he agrees with the Attorney General, who said legal aid is no longer available for a large number of people who ought to be entitled to it? If so, what areas does he intend to expand the provision of legal aid? Mr Speaker, we will carefully consider the Green Paper on legal aid and the equally important paper on Lord Justice Jackson's review of civil legal aid costs before we respond in further detail. I would note, however, that Sir Rupert Jackson argued against cutting the legal aid budget, and the Lord Chancellor decided to ignore that view. Mr Speaker, in conclusion, the basic test which we will apply in both cases is whether the proposals will deliver a saving to the public purse whilst ensuring that no one is denied access to justice because of their means. Secretary of State.
Mr Speaker, if I may first of all respond to your comments, when I finally finalising this statement before coming here, I realised it was far too long, but the fact is the subject is complex. The leaks were quite detailed but not wholly accurate, and so it was necessary, I think, to go through in some care for those outside this House as well as within, and I'm grateful for the fact that my shadow spokesman was given a little more warning of some of it. But can I first of all say in response to his remarks that I congratulate him on acknowledging that Labour would have been reducing the legal aid bill as well. I have well armed with quotations from him and all of his colleagues about their intention of reducing the legal aid bill, and indeed it featured in the Labour Party's manifesto at the election. It is starkly obvious that the British legal aid system, or the England and Wales legal aid system particularly, has become far too expensive, and it is an obvious place to start tackling deficit problems, and it does have to be done on a logical basis. The Labour Party had taken quite a lot of decisions and had made reductions affecting criminal legal aid as well as civil legal aid, but the effect of what they had done was largely to stabilise what had been the very rapid growth of legal aid before that. Legal aid expenditure absolutely exploded in this country until about 1999, and thereafter the government wrestled with it, trying to bring it down. But they succeeded in stabilising it. I think it's right to get back to something nearer what is the norm in other democratic and common law countries throughout the world, which we're far above at the moment. We do intend to go ahead with the last government's proposal to make an agency of government to replace the Legal Services Commission, and that will have to feature in our legislation when it comes. We have obviously done an equality assessment to have a look at the impact on various sectors of the population. Apart from the fact that it obviously will have an impact upon the legal profession, both barristers and solicitors, more importantly, of course, one has to have a look at what impact it will have upon gender, ethnic minorities, the poor. It is inevitably the case, of course, that litigation tends, and legal aid in particular, tends to be focused on the disadvantaged groups in society, and some aspects of legal aid are more resourced by women as well as men. But nevertheless, we have to be mindful of that. We have done an equality assessment. We believe that the impact of these changes is, on balance, justified by the public interest in ensuring that the taxpayer only pays for that where there's a public interest in having a dispute resolved. He referred to the balance between civil legal aid and criminal legal aid, and why, on this occasion, at least the scope of criminal aid is not affected. Firstly, we do spend more on criminal legal aid in this country than civil legal aid already. The reason we spend money on criminal legal aid is because it's absolutely essential in the public interest to see that justice is done in every case. It is an unfortunate feature of our legal aid system, which I accept, and we've always accepted, that we often wind up giving it to people who turn out to be rather unattractive people. But before you bring, or criminals, but before you bring the full severity of the law to bear on a criminal, you have to make absolutely sure that he is indeed the guilty party and that he's been given every chance to claim his innocence and demonstrate his innocence to save us from a mistake. And as the liberty of the subject is at stake in all serious criminal cases, we really cannot cut back the scope of criminal legal aid. I think the reason why we spend spectacularly more than other countries on legal advice and litigation in this country is because we have extended in the past the legal aid system to practically every kind of civil and family issue. And that's why, when it comes to cutting back the scope, this present package that we're consulting on concentrates on those areas.
Sir Alan Beath.
The Justice Committee will look forward to an early session with the Lord Chancellor on the details of his proposals. But are not these issues around education, employment, debt and housing, which he says don't require special legal expertise, issues on which people do need help, which they currently get through LSC contracts with Citizens Advice Bureau and neighbourhood law centres? And where else will they get this help from?
Secretary of State.
There are, and in some cases, in the case of housing issues where a person's home is at risk and they're likely to lose possession, for example, we will still enable legal aid to be available. But any cases which involve the risk of homelessness or loss of liberty will still be covered by legal aid. But he gave a list, and I won't deal with them each in turn, but all of them are addressed in other ways than just litigation. Employment issues go before a tribunal, and those tribunals were originally designed precisely to avoid representation by lawyers and legalism, and were designed to be more straightforward and accessible forms of justice. Debt certainly requires advice, but a lot of the advice required is not so much of a legal nature, but actually a practical nature in how to cope with negotiating with creditors and sorting out the management of debts that have been occurred. And I would agree with the Right Honourable Gentleman that the Citizens Advice Bureau and others are an essential source of this, and I think we're going to have to consider how far we can enable or continue to enable those kind of organisations to step in and give a wider range of advice when we stop just paying people to go to lawyers all the time, as we tend to do in all these issues.
Jack Straw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I endorse what my honourable friend said in every particular, and including as well the Right Honourable Gentleman's mention of the commitment in our own manifesto to cut legal aid. He will understand that my honourable friend can't endorse every particular of that which has been put before the House at this stage, but he and I, of course, will examine the proposals with great care. I wonder if I could ask the Right Honourable Gentleman some specific questions about the proposals in respect of criminal legal aid and guilty pleas. First, I've got no argument with the principle here. Is he certain he's going to structure the payment systems to avoid any perverse incentive to lawyers and therefore to the defendants not to continue to plead not guilty all the way through to a point of trial? Because I think there is that danger. Second, he says, and I understand exactly why, that where a case goes to the Crown Court but it is judged that it should have been handled at the Magistrates' Court, the fee will be one paid only in respect of what would have been appropriate in the Magistrates' Court. I understand that. But given that at present, under legislation which I sought to change, but the Conservative and Lib Dems and the other place overturned, defendants have an absolute right in either way cases to take their case to Crown Court. Will we get in, unless he introduces primary legislation, get into the very odd situation where the Legal Services Commission is saying a case should not have gone to the Crown Court, whilst the defendant is saying I've got an absolute right to do that under statute.
So been hanging on almost every word of the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Blackburn for the last 13 years. But now I know what is meant by those who say that lawyers are paid by the word. Secretary of State.
No, we're working on incentives to stop them being paid by the word outside this House, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman what he said. We both know that any responsible government that won the last election, or any parties that came to office, would have been cutting back on the legal aid bill. And I think we should all remind ourselves of that when, as we know, all kinds of lobbies from outside who are adversely affected by this will start to come to us and tell us that the whole spirit of British justice is being undermined by the threat to their particular activities. But we just have to do this, and I hope we can get a fair consensus on where sensibly to go.